28年前、もう二度と作らぬと神仏に誓ったことを私は破り、そしてやり終えた。人を殺す道具を再び作ってしまった。その目的では私は成功した。私がこれを作ったのは、達観すればお前の目的に同情しているからだ。うぬぼれではなく、これは私の最高傑作。旅の途上で神が立ちはだかれば神をも決めるであろう。
Hey Exiles, Chronic Painless here with the third update on my Blade Vortex League Starter Guide for PoE 3.18. The build is performing exceptionally well even in the face of Arch Nemesis mods and without the help of Ashes of the Stars. I was able to level to 100 farming juiced Crimson Temples and essentially clicking Eldritch Altars without a care. In past leagues, I was the kind of player who'd run Cast on Death Portal and level by leeching 5 ways. This time, however, my BV was blasting so hard and tanking so well I couldn't resist making the push to 100 while still juicing maps. But this build is more than just a map blaster. With a few easy tweaks to the setup, it can be converted into a bosser capable of taking down the new Uber Pinnacles. In this video, I'm going to take you through the process that I used to get myself Uber Pinnacle ready despite my mediocre at best movement and positioning. This loadout won't make you completely immortal, but it will enable you to face tank more than your fair share of boss mechanics while dealing plenty of damage as you learn these dynamic new fights. The first step on the road to Uber Pinnacle viability is getting 90 all res. Thankfully, this is much more easily done with the new Melding of the Flesh jewel, which makes it so we only need to push one of our max resistances to absurd levels. We achieve this with a high level purity aura and a couple of exquisite Eldritch implicits that activate in the presence of a unique enemy. Because we're using Eldritch implicits, I chose to max out lightning resistance. Siri Exarch applies a different max resistance bonuses on gloves, boots, and helms, and will miss the potential helm implicit the least in terms of DPS. Sacrificing the multiplicative bonuses of Unnerve or Scorched Ground would be far worse than losing a little added or increased damage. All resistant types can be rolled on body armor, so no worries there, except needing a few more embers. With +3 from your helm, +4 from your chest, and a level 23 Purity of Lightning with at least 60% increased effect, should be all set. I recommend making up the resistance penalty from melding with a big fat resistance ring, because rings have some of the lowest utility for us in terms of suffixes. Amulets can roll high tier crit modifiers, and armor is where we get our spell suppression, but rings have little to offer except resistance. Capping chaos res is really only necessary for Cirrus, as the other Uber Pinnacles don't deal any chaos damage. But this can be easily done by trading a little life or damage off the tree in exchange for the One with Evil cluster. That covers our resistances, but Melding of the Flesh isn't the only unique jewel we'll be wanting. The new Impossible Escape is also extremely useful for all the reasons I described in my last video, and we'll definitely be needing every last passive point we can save in order to fight the Uber Pinnacles. We can save even more points by speccing into Malediction over Profane Bloom, making Whispers of Doom redundant. There's an argument to be made for still using it to apply a third curse, but a third curse doesn't add nearly as much as a second, and you have to find a way to apply it consistently during the most intense fights we've ever seen in Path of Exile, so it's probably best to skip it and keep the passive point. We need these points so badly because of the power of Leith Shade. This notable's downside is more or less non-existent for the Uber Pinnacles, and the upside is exactly what we need to counteract the absolutely obscene amount of ground degen that gets thrown at us in the Uber arenas. The last change to the passive tree is ditching the Herald Reservation nodes. Since we're dropping Zealotry for Purity of Lightning, which reserves less mana, we no longer need to scrape every last bit of mana reservation efficiency from our passive tree in order to get by, as long as we have a couple of at least level 3 enlightenments. That covers the setup, so now I want to talk briefly about some important strategy tips for the actual encounters. The most important thing for taking down the Uber Pinnacles is managing your Molten Shell. These bosses hit extremely hard, with difficult to dodge abilities. The challenge of avoiding these attacks doesn't always come from the attacks themselves being particularly fast or hard to predict. It comes from the heavy limitations that are put on where you can safely position yourself in the boss arena. More often than not, you'll find yourself knowing well in advance that you're not going to be able to dodge the next attack. So pop that Molten Shell and watch as even Cirrus die beams are easily withstood. With Molten Shell, you can tank everything short of the true one-shots like Cirrus's Meteor, Maven's Memory Ring, or the Eater's Inescapable. Speaking of Cirrus's Meteor, make sure you save your Quicksilver Flask for the maze, as our relatively low movement speed won't be enough to escape without perfect precision. The other skill you need to manage to get the most out of it is your Veil BV. Veil BV can provide a massive damage boost, but it's also possible to get nothing out of it if you pop it at the wrong time. Basically, you want to make sure you're only using it immediately after an immunity phase. If you can, try to sync it with Veil Righteous Fire and Damage Flask usage for multiplicative bonuses. And whatever you do, don't use it during an ads phase or the big brain phase of the Maven. These phases are your chance to build back your flash charges and your Veil Souls, so as tempting as it can be to cover the screen in death and shred the baddies, resist that urge and save your Veil BV for when you really need it. If you follow these steps and replicate the POB in the description below as faithfully as possible, you will take down the Uber Pinnacles, even if you're not a god gamer. On the skill spectrum from Potato to Ben, I'm definitely closer to the Potato, and I was able to take them down after only a couple attempts at each one, and am now able to farm them regularly. That does it for the Week 3 update. I'll be back next week with even more tips on getting the most out of your Blade Vortex, and as always, stay painless.